But with that said, we're going to start today and we're going to talk about the anatomy of a facilitator guide. And again, this is more high-end concepts, right? We're going to be looking at really kind of the ideas and why we do things in facilitator guides, how we set up facilitator guides to be successful. We'll look a little bit at what's built out by using LeaderGuide Pro, really the end result. But if as questions come up, please let me know. Feel free to speak out or put them into chat, and we will take care of them in here. And if not, afterwards I can get you the information that's needed. But with that, let's kind of just look real quick what we're going to be looking at today. High level, what are the benefits of using a facilitator guide? I had this idea about, with this being talking about the anatomy of, like, looking at a facilitator guide and kind of in the terms of the instructor-led or the ILT system of learning. So we'll try that out. It may completely fall on its face. We're talking about structuring facilitator guides, the role of a facilitator guides, and start looking at the components that we should be putting into the different areas. But any questions on kind of where we're starting from? All right. Well, with that, let's jump in. Let's talk about what are the benefits of a facilitator guide. And again, these are some of what I think are some of the big benefits. If you've got ones that you agree with, disagree with, speak up, put them in the chat, anything like that. But for me, the first benefit, a facilitator guide is going to provide you a more consistent training program. Think about the process of, if I'm teaching the program today in Boston and Dan's teaching it in Utah and, Susie's teaching it out in California, if we're not teaching or facilitating from the same book, the experience for the learners is different, or it can be different. It could be, whether we're doing it this week, this month, next week, right? Again, about consistency, we want to make sure we've got everything laid out so that anybody can pick up the guidebook and successfully run the program. Dan just put up consistency is big, especially if we have to repeat at a later date or others are facilitating. Exactly. It's the whole idea. Think of it like a recipe. It's a recipe for success. So that's the first benefit that we would have. After that, make sure that material isn't missed. The example I love to give for this is you go to the grocery store, right? And I think most guys can speak of this. Like, you're told to go to the grocery store and pick up a few things. If it's not written down on a list for me, I'm going to forget. I actually had to go to the grocery store this morning because my wife and kids were going to the beach. And so it was like, you need to get honeydew, you need to get this, you need to get that. And we also need dish soap because we're out of it. Well, I got the sunscreen and the melons and all that. And then I got home and I don't have the dish soap. So after this, I get to go back to the store because I forgot what I needed to do. And so even if it's a facilitator who's done this so often, run this course 1,000 times, life happens, right? Maybe we're off today. Maybe that facilitator's out. We can make sure we can cover all our bases by having the material written down. Having facilitator guides is a great way to increase efficiency. And what I mean efficiency is that our training is running on time, if not ahead of time. My really bad story right there about Dawn Soap, if I strayed further into that, this whole session could go off, right? We would have less of a chance of hitting everything I'd like to cover because I spent too much time in one area. So having a guidebook that's laid out with timing and all those things are going to help us create a more efficient training program so that we can cover everything with the amount of time needed for each item. Another benefit, they tend to lead to more effective and engaging training. I'm not saying that just because we have a facilitator guide, like, hey, built this facilitator guide, our training's now effective, or it's engaging. No, that doesn't how it work. It's not how it works, but they help remove barriers, right? If I'm not worried about what's the next thing I have to say because it's down in front of me, I can spend more time in making sure that the person who's staring out the window is more engaged, or I can read the body language of what's going on, and I have a much better chance of making sure that the classroom physically or virtually is more engaged. More engagement tends to lead to more effectiveness, right? Just making sure I've covered all the different pieces, my training's more effective than if I miss some pieces. So having all these items are going to be a great way to do this. Again, take my really bad Dawn soap story I just told you again. If that was 20 minutes, I spent way too much time on that, you guys would probably be looking at your phones or, off on the other screen on YouTube or logged out. So we've got to make sure we set ourselves up, remove barriers for engagement or effectiveness, and a facilitator guide helps us do that. All right, and the last one that I've got is, it makes us less reliant on slides. And this, I know this 100% is a Pat issue. I think most instructor-led training is very too much slide driven, where it's like we live in, the knowledge level information dumps. Like, I'm showing you everything on the slides, right? Everything's on the slides. My handout's a slide, and then the facilitator's going to read me the slides. I'm not saying that's everybody's training, but it happens too much in the industry. And so by having a facilitator guide, we can make sure whether we're teaching knowledge, we're in skills, we're in attitude, that we have a guide, a structured guide that's laid out consistently across different training programs so that everything is able to be taught successfully or led successfully. So questions or anything you would add in on, benefits of facilitator guides? Well, you can't talk about benefits without talking downfalls or cons, or pros and cons, right? So for me, there's a few cons that should be addressed, right? If we're laying everything out there, let's look at it. So biggest con, I think, or biggest hardship to overcome with facilitator guides is getting facilitators to buy into using it. And this one, I've been doing this for many years. This is probably the biggest one when people start moving into truly using facilitator guides. And for this, what I'd actually come out and say is, at the end of the day, we got to determine what's more important. Is the facilitator more important? And this is at the organizational level, really in terms of training. Is the facilitator more important, or is the material more important? And I'm not discounting the person, right? A great facilitator is going to make an average program that much better, right? They're going to take an average program and they're going to make it exceptional. But the material, not every facilitator is a subject matter expert in what they're teaching. They may be a subject matter expert strictly in facilitating training. So if we're trying to learn about how to rebuild a lawnmower and that person has no idea, we got to make sure everything's written out. So that's the biggest one. If we're designers or developers, maybe we don't have any control over that, right? Maybe the getting facilitator buy-in is us having conversations with our managers or the VPs of learning and development so they can get in there and have those conversations. If you're at the VP, you have control over this. I almost look at it, it's like, we're going to look at it like you are almost like the parent, like, hey, we're doing this because I said so. But we got to figure out a way to bridge that gap for getting facilitators to buy in. I mean, that's a whole other session we could just do just on that. And then the other big con for me is upkeeping, the upkeep on documents, the revising of documents. Obviously, this upkeep, revisions, editing, all of this happens regardless of whatever method you have unless you don't have a method and it's just like, I get up there and I speak. But with a facilitator guide, there's a lot more moving pieces, right? Maybe we've brought in our slide images, right? We've got activities, we've got notes. And so how do we go through and make sure all of this is done? And so it's just making sure we've got a series of system and processes and all those. I just want to make sure we address that, there are cons, or there's not necessarily cons, but hardships that come up when we use facilitator guides. All right, and Gina just put up, don't feel like buy-in has ever been an issue for facilitators. That's awesome. I can't. Too often I've seen where there's pushback on it, or where too many concessions are given that hamper the development of things. So it's finding that happy medium. And I'm actually just going to write down a note so that by the end of the summer, we'll do a whole session on buy-in, getting buy-in. Dan, getting people to use a consistent system for annotating guides, updates can be a challenge. Absolutely. This is one of the benefits of LeaderGuide Pro. We'll look at it briefly today, but we've got a whole session coming up in the not too distant future on working collaboratively with LeaderGuide Pro, so that when revisions and all that comes up, it's easy to do. All right, so we're going to jump into this idea I had in my mind, and it didn't quite come out exactly how I wanted it, but the idea that, how does a facilitator guide fit into the system? Like, I was thinking like circulatory or respiratory system, but how does it fit into the ILT system? So we're going to take a step back from there, though, and let's look at it in terms of why do we do training? And, obviously I brought up my little slide over on the side here, right? Basically, trainings is built because there's an issue or a goal, something that we're, as an organization, as a department, we're trying to achieve. ILT, what does ILT stand for? ILT stands for instructor-led training. I use it interchangeably with virtual instructor-led training, basically meaning, there is someone live, either physically or virtually, helping facilitating a training session. But taking a step back, the issue, we're building training because we're trying to resolve something. We're trying to fix an issue. We're trying to get our sales team to sell more. We're trying to, increase our customer satisfaction by a certain percentage, right? Whatever that is. So we figured out, here's what we need, here's where we want to get people to. And then we've got our employees or our learners, and we're trying to figure out how to get them from where they're currently at, like from here up to here, right? Like, how do we move them towards that area? And so this is, in that in between of where the goal is and where the employees or the learners currently are, this is where we start doing things like, if you're using the ADDIE model, we go through analysis, or we're determining, does training make sense? Does training fix this? Does coaching fix this? Do we need more people on hand? Do we need to let a certain amount of people go, right? We're trying to figure out what's the best manner. Not every training or not every, issue needs to be resolved by training. Going for the rest of this, we are going to imagine that it does, right? We're going to the stage that we do determine training needs to happen. So then we get into things like we create a design document where we start setting up our learning objectives and our learner achievements, and how do we going to determine how people are moving forward, right? So we're building all those things. And then we determine what's the best manner to do the training, right? So after we've gone through all this, and if we've determined training's our issue, or our training's our answer, does it make sense for it to be e-learning? Does it make sense for it to be, small little chunks like drip emails? Does it, does it have to be instructor-led, right? And we lay all these things out. So that's kind of the high-level process that's happening. But once we get into the idea that, hey, we've got to build out instructor-led training or virtual instructor-led training, we now know there is going to be a facilitator or facilitators in front of the class or in front of the learners. And now we've got to figure out how we're getting information from our facilitator down to our learners, right? What's that flow of information going down towards them? This is where a facilitator guide really can come into play, right? So again, we talked about it before. If I just have a facilitator in front of the class, right, and that person's out sick or they've got promoted, there could be a loss of information, right? Grey's Anatomy bus takes them out. Now the next person running that course, we may as an organization may have been set back because the information was in that facilitator's head and they're no longer available, or they're no longer with the company, or they're on leave. So if we get everything into a facilitator guide and kind of put the facilitator guide, in a way in between the facilitator and the learners, now the facilitator's working with the guide to then help send information to the learners. And in that facilitator guide, we've got certain things that are going to be coming up, right? This is the facilitator guide. We're saying things, we're asking things, we're showing stuff, we're doing things, but it's also laying out what type of materials do we need, what do we need to be prepared for. So we're basically, I like to consider it my ruling document. It has everything that I need to successfully run this course in the session, in one location, right? Like I could pick up that guidebook, and I don't think I have one right next to me, but I can pick it up and I've got everything to successfully run it, whether it's my first time, it's my 50th time, whether I'm doing it in California or, Susie's doing it out in Florida. Everything's in one location for us to work from. All right. With that, let's dive into really where we should be. If we're building it, if you're going to be building from scratch, what do we need? Where do we start? And the first place is the structure that we want to use. And so for that, I think the easiest structure for everyone to use is a 2-level hierarchical system. And I said that to my kids and they're like, say what? So 2-level hierarchical system, think of it like an outline, right? Roman numeral, terminal objective, uppercase letter, enabling objective. So 2 levels, right? And so terminology that you could probably use: terminal objective, enabling objective. The one that we use within our programs is module and lesson. PowerPoint, other organizations use things like topic and subtopic, chapter and lesson, objective and lesson, right? It doesn't matter your naming convention, but it's 2 levels. Level 1, and then intended to level is level 2. So if we were to look at this in a guidebook itself, let me just get up to this real quick. And let's jump here. So if we were to look at a table of contents, which really, table of contents, think of this like your course structure. Here is, level 1 is my modules. Level 2 are my lessons. So the idea is a course is made up of modules, or whatever your terminology is. I'm going to use modules and lessons. A course is made up of modules. Modules are made up of lessons. And then within the lessons, this is where we get into the items like say this, show this slide, play this video, all the different items we want our facilitators to be doing as the course goes along. So the structure sets ourselves up for everything that we're going to do. All right. After looking at structure, we really need to consider what are the roles a facilitator guide plays. And these are really going to be will determine how we're going to go about, using that structure to lay things out in our documents. All right. So if we go through, so there's two main roles of a facilitator guide. There's also two roles of a participant guide. Whole other conversation. But the two roles of a facilitator guide, the one that everyone thinks about is that it's the in-the-moment reference aid, right? Say this, do this, ask this, run this activity, all of those type of things. But just as important is it's a study guide. What do we do to make sure that we are prepared to run this course? So let us look at, I'm going to flip back over here to my Word document. So we're back to my table of contents in this sample facilitator guide. Notice in this guidebook, we've broken it down into two sections. If I can get this to draw. Introductory materials. This is my study guide section. Right? Obviously, the whole thing's a study guide, right? We want to run through and make sure everything's done. But when I say kind of study guide, this is everything that we need to go through prior to the training to make sure that we're ready to successfully run the course. Right? So that's the introductory material section here. And then in the moment reference aid, we call it these are our modules and our lessons. But this is how we break those down. What's my core? Here's my introduction module with my welcome lesson, and then we get into our first content, first section of content like customer service, and within customer service there's email and there's phone etiquette and there's all the different in-person, handling in-person complaints, different lessons within customer service. But the more we can go through and understand the different roles, it will help us when we start looking at the different pieces and how we put those in. In a moment, we're going to go through and we're going to look at the key components that are in a guidebook. And we'll look at it in terms of both facilitate, the in-the-moment reference aid, and then we'll look at it in terms of the study guide side. We're going to start off with the in-the-moment reference because this is really truly where the training's happening. And then we'll circle back, even though generally the study guide stuff is more up front. I just want to make sure we go spend enough time in the actual, setting up successfully for the program. All right, so which brings us to the last piece for today, but it's also the deepest one that we're going to dive into, which are, what are the components of a facilitator guide? All right. We're going to, at this moment, jump back into Word here. So I'm going to jump down real quick, and we're going to we'll look at, again, we're looking at it in the beginning in terms of whether, we're looking at this in the moment reference. So this is really looking at our modules and our lessons about the actual training. Dan just put up a question. Is it better to create a training outline first, or can that be organic as you build out the skeleton of your guide? It just, either way works. I tend to prefer to do the outline first. So I kind of here are the main points. And reason being on that, wrong button, that one. Reason being is I may not want to build top down, meaning we're going to say this, we're going to do this, we're not even say and do, but more at the module and the lesson level. Let's jump back over here to my table of contents to kind of show this point. Right, so if I built this out as an outline, right, so let's say this this first item, building a facilitator guide, right? That's my main module. But then, introduction's a lesson, and 2 roles of a facilitator guide, creating a course structure. These are the lessons that are falling within this module. Well, maybe, you know what? I actually have a bunch of stuff that's already done on importing PowerPoints and notes. So I want to start there as my place. If I get my whole outline in place first, it's easy enough for me to jump in and be like, all right, I'm going to importing PowerPoints and notes. And then I'm going to jump up over to 2 roles of facilitator guide. And I can kind of bounce through my documents and build at different pieces. Or if I'm building collaboratively, I could send, this, creating a course structure, that could be sent over to Karen, and she can build that, where I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to work on importing PowerPoints and notes, then we can build those individually, and then later on stitch them together to build out my whole guidebook. But some people's minds don't like to work that way. Well, great, then just start building organically, but keep in mind the structure, right? Use modules, use lessons. In LeaderGuide Pro, let's kind of come down here. Make sure I've got all my arrow stuff turned down. Like if I was to come down, right? So, after this, I'd put in a summary at a summary lesson. Well, maybe, you start building this out and you're like, wait, I needed another module. I could come up and click on the module button here and then get prompted to put in a new name for my module. And then it will prompt me to build out my next lesson. Right, and if I had a lesson objective, I could put that information in. Right, I could put in timing, all these type of things as I'm building out my program. And then when I click OK, it would go in and put in those pieces. So I could build out, as I needed it, drop in modules and lessons right from the ribbon. Right here. For people that would, rather put in, a course structure. Now, this document's already built out, so this wouldn't actually create out a document for me at the moment, but it at least gives you where you can kind of see the system. You can come in and start choosing, an outline structure, what we call the guidebook design template. And you could go in and start building this out, right? So like on this one, I chose the pre-built single objective, right? And I could come in and I could now start going in and putting in all my modules and my lesson names. And then if I was to build out the course or build out the document, and again, I've just pulled up this dialog box. I didn't actually start a document. But I could build out the whole course with the structure. Well, here, let me show you it real quick, just because we're here and I think it's a good place. Right, so I started a new document by clicking this button here, which gives me this dialog box, and I can put in my course name. Right, and I could make all my choices of facilitator guide as a participant guide, make all those items. And I'll start pulling in all those individual pieces. Right, and these components will make more sense when we get back on track in a moment and we go through those components. That was just prompting me to save, so I did that. But in a moment, it's going to pull up that guidebook design template that we just looked at, right? And I could come in, and again, I could choose a different one. But the nice part is I could then come in. You're able to highlight the information. we'll do this one. I'll highlight the information, and I can add in my lesson, my module names, and my lesson names. Right, and if I wanted to put in information about my module goals and my lesson timing at this stage, I could do that over here on the right-hand side. But if I click OK, and I zoom out, you'll see it starts just building out the guidebook with that whole course structure. And then I'm prompted, do you want to add images to the document now? So if I had PowerPoints and I wanted to bring those in, I could. For time purposes, I'm just going to say no. But with my guidebook ready, and if I navigate over to my table of contents, right, depending on how you like to build, I could build and put in my whole course outline at the time of development, at the time of starting to build my facilitator guide, and get that all there. Or I could just start off with this first option. This one here, new module, new lesson, and then use the module and lesson buttons to add them in. So I guess, to go back to Dan's original question, there isn't a better way to do it. It's how you like to do it. Whatever you find the most effective is the way you should go. And if you've got a tool that helps you go that either way, will make it much easier. So Nick, going from the design doc to build out facilitator guides, absolutely, right? You've built out his whole structure, and you can go from there to import that design document into a facilitator guide, whether you do it manually yourself or using a program like Learning Design Tool to import into LeaderGuide Pro. Makes it very simple. Gina, this looks like a Word plugin. Does LeaderGuide Pro sync with PowerPoint? Yes, it is a Word plugin. Yes, it does talk back and forth with PowerPoint. That dialog box that I clicked out that says, do you want to add images to your document now? I could have, if I said yes, I would have been able to bring in my PowerPoints and drop them into the course structure. And yes, you can use your own branding and icons. It does not work on so Stacy, so back up, just make sure I hit. Can we also use our own branding and icons? Yes, there's a whole customization process in here where you can go through and build out what we call a collection, which is, it determines what templates are all built out. It also applies a style guide, brings in whatever icons you want to use, and we've got a whole system to set that up. So yes, Gina, you can do all of that and dial it in and then share it with everyone who uses it, so everyone's building from the same place. For Stacy's question about, does this work on a Mac? Natively, no. And the reason why it doesn't is the Mac version of Office 365 or Office is not a full version. It is missing some components that the Windows side is. So, and it used to run on it, but between like Microsoft and Apple fighting, they've removed some pieces. That being said, I run this on my Mac on a daily basis. I just have put in a program called, I use Parallels, but basically I've created a bootable Windows drive on my Mac so that I can run Windows specific programs, which means I do have to have the Windows Office 365, but it's the same if you run like Articulate 360, the non-web based, like that only runs on the Windows. So it's, until they fix whatever they're doing in the background, it's not available natively on a Mac, but as soon as it is, we will put it back out there. And yes, it runs on the desktop version of Word. All right, so we have gone completely sideways, which in one way is great because I can answer some people's questions, but for people that wanted to kind of just get into the components, I appreciate your patience, and let's dive back into those. So again, we are talking about some of the key components of a facilitator guide. All right, so let's go back to Word. And again, I'm going to jump in and here. That's the one we just built. So let's go back to my sample one because I put in some information to it. And we're going to go back to here. So on our, that 2-level hierarchical structure, every module we think should have an overview page. For those who were a child of an 80s, remember your Trapper Keeper? And you had it doesn't have to be a Trapper Keeper, but I just like them. But wherever you had your tab, in your 3-ring binder that you could switch from science class and go over to math class, think of these module pages like those tabs, but it's broken down at the module level, right? So really at your terminal objective level, where we're capturing information about the goal, how much time we're doing, an overview, which would really be like a 1 to 2 sentence description of how we're getting to that specific area. Getting the learners from wherever they are currently to this goal, which is probably a subset of the main goal of the course, right? Short list of materials that you need just for that section. And then we like to break out, references, resources that you want to have stand outside of your list of materials, right? Where materials needed may be like laptop and projector and flip chart and all those things. Resources and references may be like the link to the specific regulation we're talking about in this compliance training or things like that. Now, when we scroll down into our lessons, so big thing on the component. So at the, as a component, in terms of the in-the-moment reference aid, we're breaking stuff down into whether it's a module, high-level look of everything that we're trying to achieve in this specific terminal objective in that module. Otherwise, think of it like a chapter. And then the lessons are the smaller steps we're taking within those. So I like to always include how much time are we spending in this specific lesson, right? So in this one, we're going to spend 10 minutes in my introduction. And then I'm using slides, I'm showing, I give them here's the slide that we're going to be showing, with maybe what's being said next to it. Here's the activity that we're going to be running, right? The debrief session after the activity, those type of things. But notice the way we break this out, we use tables. In this case, I'm using a 3-column table to set up my document, right? Tables make things easy to lay out on the page, right? I don't necessarily, when I get something in a table, I don't have to worry about that image that I just imported floating away to page 2 because we just made edits, right? It's tied to that specific table cell in the document. So whether it's a 3-column, whether it's a 2-column table, that's your choice. But then notice we always use a visual cue in the first column. So kind of going to Gina's question about, using your own icons and stuff like that. Using a visual cue to drive actions of your facilitator. The more we can consistently use the same icon for the same action, the more your facilitators get used to it. And the goal for our facilitators is we want them to be face up in front of the camera, face up in front of the class as much as possible, right? If we've got a document that is very much, wrong button. This one. Sorry for hitting all the different buttons. I'm going to go in, turn that off. Let's just give myself, let's say I had a document I needed to give myself more text. So let's say I had a document that had a whole bunch of text, and this was my facilitator guide here. What tends to happen is the facilitator is going to spend a lot of time reading that. So whether it's in front of them, right, and they're turned down and they're not looking at the class, or they're not looking at the camera, or it's on, a second monitor to the right or the left of them, and they're reading a huge amount of text, they're not in front of the camera or in front of the class, which breaks eye contact, which makes it lowers engagement because now people aren't necessarily paying attention, or they're feeling like, if you're just going to read to me, why don't you just, give me the information? I'll read it myself and I can save time and all those type of things. So you can actually, if you use visual cues, right, where I could go in and break the information up into the different actions that I want the facilitator to be doing, right? So maybe this is, an item, that's something I want the facilitator to be saying. If I chose the right block. Sorry. I started at the wrong side of the documents. I should have started at the top down. But I could go in, I could break this information up into smaller chunks, and I'm able to now have information that the facilitator can easily glance down, get the information, and this would be better off to be broken up into, I'm just clicking in certain locations, but I could break this down maybe into a numbered list or whatever that is. And now it's just that much easier for the facilitator to, at a glance, get the information and be back up in front of the class, be back up in front of the camera. And so much of it is tied to these visual cues, right? The more they can see that visual cue, like they glance down, all right, hey, whatever the icon you use, in our case, we're using kind of like the cartoon speaker bubble, right? The more you see this, all right, hey, I know I'm saying something real quick, or we're running an activity, or all those different things, or we're breaking out information, and we scroll back up so that we can see it a little bit better. But it's broken out so we know exactly what we're doing, right? I can put time in underneath specific items, or like here, I spent 10 minutes on, we're spending 10 minutes in this overall lesson, and in this in here we're running activity, and right underneath this activity I can see that there's a marker for 7 minutes. So I know out of that 10 minutes, 7 minutes is going to be in my activity, and now I can make sure I stay on track. So we're more efficient and we're not falling off at the end because we can't cover everything. So the big thing at the in-the-moment reference side of a facilitator guide for components, right? We're using modules and lessons, that 2-level hierarchy. I would take your modules here. Those are going to be, you base your modules off your terminal objectives, right? So if within customer service, if we have a module on, if we had a goal of, we want to increase the customer satisfaction on email responses, right? Maybe one of the modules is on email, handling emails, and we've broken out our lessons off of those. But the goal of that whole email module is to drive people to have better responses, to handle emails in a better way so that we get better customer satisfaction scores. So in the moment, we're looking at, modules tied to your terminal objectives. Lessons are the stepping stones with, that the learner is taking within there to get from where they're currently at in smaller steps to get up to the goal of that overall module. And then within the lesson, use a structure. We really like tables. Again, it makes stuff easy to break out and format and lay out. Use visual cues to drive actions, and then make your information very easy to read, right? Again, if we give someone a whole bunch of text, they're going to read a whole bunch of text, and it's going to become a less effective training because you're losing engagement, because people are going to be like, why are you reading to me when I could do that myself? All right. So really, as much as the in the moment reference aid, right, where the actual training is happening, there's small amounts of actual components to it, right? We call them content blocks. This one, content blocks, right? In this case, a say block, an activity block, to break up the material, right? We're using some formatting, using icons. I would definitely have a style guide so that it's easy for you to quickly go through and apply, whether it's body text or headline text or bullets or numbers, that is consistently done. Style guides, something along using like word styles, those type of items. But that's most of it. It's going to be just breaking that information out into those different pieces. Where more components come up into play is in the study guide side of your facilitator guide. And so let's scroll up here in this document so we can kind of see the upfront material. All right, I'm going to scroll this out. So we'll go to 2 pages and we can zoom in as needed. On your facilitator guide, on a participant guide, I would always have some sort of cover page. One, it helps set branding. You can make sure you meet your style and branding needs of your organization, colors, all of those type of things. But it's also a visual reminder, whether I'm taking the course off of the shelf, picking the book off the shelf, or the 3-ring binder off the shelf, or if I'm opening up the file digitally, or at least looking at the screen, the screen preview or the document preview, I can see what I'm getting. I would also, naming convention would also fall into here. Like, how do you name your files more for the digital side? But always make sure you've got a good cover page. Don't judge a book by its cover, except you don't want it to look awful. But have a cover page. Then we like to call it the acknowledgments page. It's really your inside front cover, right? It's where you got your copyright notices, your legal notices, maybe it's information from compliance, where you are in terms of training or thanking stakeholders. But it's laying the groundwork, but it also kind of plays a role. If you're printing a document, right? If you print a book and you've got a cover page, here, I've got a book here. Right? Got my book. Right? If this is my cover page, when I open it up, I know in this one I've got some, there's got a forward and stuff like that. But there's generally some sort of inside front cover, right? Where you've got your legal notices and all those type of things. It's setting yourself up so that the document prints correctly as well. So that you've got a page in there, so that as you open it up, if it's printed 2 sides, it could be on the back side of it, so that as you go through, everything lines up correctly in your document. But we think it's very, especially because you're building out training, you want to make sure it's copyrighted. So get that copyright into the document, at least on that cover page. LeaderGuide Pro goes a step further, and it alternates. If I scroll, let me come back here. It puts in, out of the box, your copyright, and then when it was revised on opposite pages. Again, this is being printed 2-sided, so if this was to fall apart, one the front page has the name of the program. On the back page, it's got the copyright. So your copyright's sitting on every single page. It's just not on both sides of every page. But the acknowledgements page would be one to definitely keep. Definitively, you need a table of contents. Next piece, must have table of contents. One, it's your course structure, right? Modules and lessons, right? It's showing you your introductory materials, plus everything that's being taught. The big thing on your table of contents, and I probably should have talked about it during the actual talk about structure. You really want to think about that structure, right? If your course, and we'll go back to my customer service. Let's say it's customer service, the 5-day training. I wouldn't have one module be day 1 and the second module be day 2 with just lessons underneath it. Because at the end of the day, if I was coming back to this, and put yourself in the learner's seat, if I was to come back to this as a learner, day 1 means nothing to me, once I'm through that training. Where instead of day 1, I've got I have a module on handling customer emails, and I've got a module on, the in-person customer service experience, and I've got a module on XYZ. I can refer back to the participant guide that I will build out. Maybe you've built out before, but more than likely building out after you've built your facilitator guide. That structure is there and it makes sense for them, because we want our participant guides, and we talked about participant guides serving 2 roles. The second role of the participant guide is a post-course resource, right? One is it's an in the moment or during the training support document, right? Turn to page 37 for this activity. But more importantly, post-course resource that they have something to go back to. So our course structure is really the way they navigate, right? They go to the table of contents and they're like, what was the proper manner for responding to that email? I can turn right to that page because it's in my table of contents. And that was actually set in place when I put out the structure for my facilitator guide. I know it's a bigger, longer concept, but everything kind of is all tied together. So have your table of contents. You want to make it so it truly, someone can open it up and quickly get to the different pieces that they need to. Now, we're going to look, again, at the study guide. I know we're kind of coming up with, we got about 5 minutes left. And I still also want to make sure any other questions I can answer. But we strongly recommend in your facilitator guide, and here, let me take it out. I'll put it into, so it can look like it as if it was going to be printed. Take off all the formatting. We like to provide what we call as the getting started section, where we've put in about this guide. This is our 1 to 2 page insurance policy in case our everyday facilitator is not in the building, not running this course. It's laying out how you set up your guide to work. What's the purpose of the guide? What are they going to find in it? How's it organized? How do we lay out the information? Whether you're using our structure or using LeaderGuide Pro or you build one out, put something like this in, because it's going to definitively help you when that Grey's Anatomy bus comes through and takes out your everyday facilitator. It's it's an insurance policy. It is not there for your everyday facilitator. So this is 2 pages. It is 1 additional page printing, but it saves the program when you need it. Lindsay, this is being recorded. I will actually, after this, I'm going to put this up onto YouTube, so you can get it off my YouTube channel. And you could it will also end up on our website. Let me do this real quick before you go. You guys don't need to watch me jump over to another page. but I'm going to put into chat. There is the, it's just all the numbers and letters, but that's to my YouTube channel where we're going to be putting these things in. If you guys aren't subscribed, maybe you want to. It's always beneficial to me, but if not, check in from time to time, see what's out there. I've got a whole bunch of new things coming out this week and next week, and leading up to, we've got a masterclass going on building out a series of collections to work within, or templates to work within LeaderGuide Pro that's coming out in July. All right. So back to here. Wrong one. So this getting started section. Just want to get right back to the right documents. All right. So getting started, again, our 1 to 2 page insurance policy. If you're using LeaderGuide Pro or you want to look at feel free, use this information as is. Obviously, if you've got a different formatting, you kind of want to lay that out. But, give the person who's taking this on for the first time a chance to be successful. Make it easier for them to do their job. After that, if you're using icons, those visual cues, which we strongly recommend, give them a graphics cues page. I like to think of this like my map legend. This is showing me everything that's possibly, all the different icons that are on my document and what they mean. So when that facilitator is getting prepared and they're not quite sure what the little arrow coming down, what that icon is, they can they can go back and they can quickly, change it out, or they quickly get the idea of what it is. Not that I'm going to do it at the moment, but just to show you. Like this is showing in this doc is every possible icon that LeaderGuide Pro allows you to bring in, prior to you making any customizations. There is a feature in the program, and this is in version 16 of LeaderGuide Pro, where you could actually, instead of showing you everything that's in the, all the different content blocks, once your document's built out, if you choose this graphic cues, show only what's in the document, it will scan the entire facilitator guide and then rebuild that training at a glance with just the content blocks that are in that document. So that page is dialed in for that, just what they're seeing at that moment. And if things change, you just have to rebuild, you just run it again and it rebuilds it a second time. So we've got those graphic cues pages to make things easy for our facilitators to know exactly what they're going to be coming against. Actually, this is the one I want. Because again, this is the one that I built stuff into it. All right, after that, we like, another component for the study guide. We call it the program in perspective. It's the really of why, the why and what, why we're doing this training and what are we trying to achieve. So a lot of us build out design documents where we've kind of captured, we've figured out that big, the goal we're trying to achieve, and we've set up all these steps, what we're trying to overall, at the highest level, trying to achieve with the training program. But as we go further and further down the line, right, maybe that program was first designed a year ago or 2 years ago, we may have stopped really thinking about the overarching goal of this program and just looked at it as like, we've got this program, let's make updates to it, without really thinking about the why. So give yourself a place to capture the why, right? Write down why it's important, why we're doing this program. And I would break it down by audience, meaning why is it important to the organization? Why is it important to the learner? Right? Just because it's important to the organization doesn't mean it's important to the learner. Or why it's important to the learner may not be completely in agreement with why it's important to the organization. But we need to understand those so that we can, especially for the learner, let them know what they're going to get out of this training, right? The what's in it with them, what's in it for me. Talk to them about that, right? Put it in for the facilitator so everyone has an understanding of what they're going to be getting out of that training. Learning objectives, write them down. Here's the learning objectives that we're trying to achieve. These are the steps to get us to the overall goal of the course. Those will often not be your modules, right? And then bookended with an introduction and a conclusion module, right? So tell them what we're going to tell them in our introduction. Go through all your learning objectives as your modules. Tell them what we told them as our conclusion, right? I think of it like the burger method. And then lastly, I would put in what we call the program preparation. Listing up, what's the pre-work? What do the learners need to do prior to the training happening? Right? The laundry list of everything you need to successfully run this program. Have that in the document. How do you want to have the room set up? I should need to unzoom so I can actually... I'm zoomed in too much. Sorry about that, folks. So, how do you need this room to be set up? So if it's in a classroom, maybe it's just text. Line them up at 4 round tables with eight seats apiece. Maybe you want to bring in images. If this is virtual, maybe it's listing off all the polls you need to make sure that are on there, or the overlays people are using, or where they can access the different files that they need to have access to, right? So setting your environment up, right? So room setup, environment setup, whatever you want to think about. And then what do you need for instructor preparation? What does the instructor need to do prior to training, right? Like, do they have to go back and do they need to review everything, that these, prerequisite courses were done? Are there emails that need to be set up? But lay it all out, maybe almost in a checklist form, so that they can kind of work their way through, and they're, by getting through that preparation, they are ready to run that course, whether it's the first time they've done it, the 100th time, or, they had to step up, the day of because of, whatever reason. So in terms of the components, that's how I break it down. Look at it in terms of those 2 roles. What are, in the moment reference, study guide, and how do we set those up so that they work together? Using a program like LeaderGuide Pro, which, I kind of showed a little bit today, obviously makes that a lot easier because it's, we give you a series of templates that you can customize out, and then a system that helps automate it and with clicks of buttons instead of you spending all this time. But you can do it manually. It's just it can be a lot of work, but it's time well spent either way. Just giving a PowerPoint deck with notes in it isn't enough. It's, you've basically you've set yourself up to strictly live within the world of knowledge. I mean, obviously you can get into skills, but you're still basically saying without this PowerPoint, this training cannot happen. Where a facilitator guide incorporates in PowerPoints or incorporates in images or videos, but whether you've got the technology or not, the material is there so I can run it. But that's, I've gone 6 minutes over, so I apologize about that. But that's what I have for today. But with that, I'm going to let you go, and I'm going to start editing so I can get this video up for you. But hope you guys all have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Thanks.
You're welcome.